Hello, today I'm making a video that is going to talk about some stages of intellectual and emotional maturity, because sometimes people struggle because they haven't moved through all those stages and it's affecting their ability to have faith and believe in things and to trust. And so at first, most of us, we start out being idealistic. We will naively trust, believe in things, um, and as a child, we'll often do this towards our parents and adults. And idealism serves an important purpose because this idealization allows us to not experience anxiety and fear in situations where we need to be able to trust and be close to someone. The idealization allows us to feel comfortable, believe that things are going to work out for the best, that we'll be taken care of, and all these things, and it makes life easier in that way. But the downside of idealism is that you can be taken advantage of, and the world isn't always going to match those idealistic beliefs. And so later, the next phase people go through is cynicism, where they will try to find ways, try and point out the ways that something could be wrong. Or if there's two alternatives, one seems too good to be true, the other seems kind of dark or not such a wonderful thing to believe, they'll go with the one that is less positive because they're protecting themselves from being taken advantage of. But if you're able to move past that and become more emotionally and intellectually mature, you'll be able to see the world with your eyes wide open, acknowledging that there is positive and negative. Just like maybe someone as a kid grew up thinking life is going to be wonderful, everything's going to be perfect, and dreams are going to come true, and they're very idealistic and hopeful, and then they struggle, they have some rough years, and they become very cynical and more depressed. And looking through the world through that depressed lens, they only see things to be sad about and negative about, and they have a hard time believing in positive, and they struggle with that. But then as you progress past that and become more emotionally mature, you're going to realize that yes, there are positive feelings and highs in life, and there are negative feelings and lows in life, and you're able to accept those things and look at them with open eyes, seeing them for what they are, rather than magnifying and focusing on positives or negatives. But yeah, so I'm going to go through a little bit about cynicism and how that develops, and especially in relation to faith, because the people who are in the idealistic stage, they can easily believe even without evidence. They can just believe, right? And people in the cynical stage won't even take the actions needed to think through why they could believe, and they put the total burden of proof on the outside world that others have to, it's guilty until proven innocent, and that's the cynicism protecting them from getting their hopes up and from being taken advantage of. But then as you're able to move past that to a more emotionally mature state, then you won't be so afraid of getting your hopes dashed that you have to not believe things. You will be able to pursue and explore and experiment without all the fear involved and the cynicism. Yeah, so cynicism, idealism, I have some notes here on my laptop I'm looking at, but idealism is really important. It allows us to approach high anxiety situations, go through high anxiety situations without experiencing so much of that anxiety. For example, in dating, romantic relationships, getting close to someone, approaching someone else, trusting someone else, there's a lot to be anxious about, right? But over and over again, people, they will date, they will develop a relationship with someone, they'll see the positives and not see the negatives. They've got these rosy glasses, And of course, there's a lot of things that work there, but a lot of it is idealization of their partner. And this is biologically supported. This allows people to get close and to trust and establish those connections in spite of how they otherwise might feel anxiety in those situations. So idealism allows you to believe and trust when there's good reason to maybe be afraid. But I want you to imagine a person. Imagine there's a girl named Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, I'm just making up this name, Elizabeth, dates lots of people. She trusts these guys. She thinks, oh, this guy is the one. He's so amazing. He's just everything I could want. But over and over again, later she finds out that they were deceptive, or that they were taking advantage of her in some way, leading her on, or they weren't honest in different ways. And eventually, she starts to become more cynical and to protect herself from the big high and then crash. So imagine she's had enough of these crashes, and she has one that's particularly intense. She was with this person for many months, a year, and as it comes down and crashes, the level of despair and anguish crosses a certain threshold to the point that it becomes traumatic. And the despair and the trauma of this is so intense, and the grief is so intense that the subconscious mind decides it's going to protect you against this. It's going to put up defenses to help you avoid this ever happening again. And so what the defense that starts to come up, so idealization is a defense against anxiety, right? But now you develop another defense. This one's called reaction formation. It's where you strengthen the opposite attitude to protect yourself from something. So a reaction formation to idealism, where you'll see the positive and get your hopes up, which ended up hurting you when you got the crash. Now you develop more cynicism, where when presented with two alternatives, you'll choose the one that doesn't get your hopes up, because you're used to your brain naturally wanting to choose the one that got your hopes up. So that's the cynicism there. And this is a defense to protect yourself from the pain of having your hopes dashed, and from feeling stupid or from being taken advantage of. And it's run by the subconscious mind. So you will notice it, but you probably won't notice the full extent to how it affects you. But there's a lot to be cynical about, and it's very useful to have that. As you start to develop that cynicism, you'll be amazed by how many things you see more clearly, and how useful it is and helpful in recognizing the truth. Because in your idealistic glasses, you missed a lot of truth. People tend to put their best foot forward to you, and they'll try and manage your impression of them to see the positive and not the negative. And by using more cynical glasses, you're able to see more to them that is very accurate and true, that you couldn't see before that. And so now you're trusting the cynicism more, because it's opening your mind to see new things that you didn't see before. And it's protecting you from being taken advantage of. And this is very useful and important. Advertisements as well, all these advertisements that promise things that are not true, that are too good to be true. The pictures, the people in the advertisements, they're unrealistic, and they're not going to happen for you. You're not going to have perfect skin as an older adult just because you put on this cream, or all these different things. And so that further strengthens the reaction formation there, that when presented with two choices, one seems really great and the other also explains quite well, but it's not as positive. It doesn't get my hopes up. You'll choose that one. That gets stronger and stronger through this time. But with this pendulum, people often like extremes, and because it makes things simple. If they go to the extreme of, well, if in doubt, just believe and trust, that makes things simple. But you can also say, if in doubt, well then doubt, don't believe. And that is simple and useful too. But both of them are missing out. So, a depressed person, like I said, looks out on the world and sees a lot to be sad about and frustrated about. And a highly optimistic person will probably redirect their attention away from a lot of things that are genuinely saddening. And they're doing all they can to keep their emotional state up, you know. Also, some people tell themselves that altruism doesn't exist, that people never do things just because they care or out of compassion, but there's always some motive to feel good about yourself or other complicated reason why people would do good things, and that people are only selfish. On the other end of the spectrum, there are people who idealize others to the extreme, and they will just see the positive in others. And if others do something that's selfish, they'll say it's just because they were hurt, or it's not really their fault. It's just because of their circumstances. And they idealize so far that their idealization doesn't exactly reflect reality. Just like the cynic explains away as so much. And through their glasses, each of them sees the world matching their view. Just like the depressed person sees the world as a sad place, and the optimist sees the world as a happy place. They see the world as matching their viewpoint, but really they're all missing things. And the cynic who sees others as selfish is protected from being taken advantage of. The idealist is able to connect with others and build trusting relationships easily because they're willing to do that, but they get taken advantage of, and it's tricky. But really, more truthfully, going along with this subject of people being altruistic or not altruistic, and good or not, or selfish, more truthfully, people exist on a distribution, right, from selfish to more altruistic. Every person has pre-programmed desires built into them to take care of themselves, to keep themselves alive, to keep themselves safe. And also, people have pre-programmed desires in them that look out for the welfare of others and desire the welfare of others. These desires help us exist in communities, and they help us to have relationships and to live in families, which is important for our survival and to be able to have children and raise them. We need to desire the welfare of others, not just ourselves. And so, truthfully, people have both of these things, whereas the cynic will often emphasize the selfish part of it. Or they will say, well, if I do things for good, I acknowledge I'm doing things that are good because I want to feel good about myself. But they won't say, well, I have a built-in desire for compassion that makes me want others to be taken care of well. And they'll say, well, they only see it in terms of them being selfish. Oh, I have compassion. Well, me taking care of them is selfish because I'm just doing it for my compassion. Like, you eat food because you're hungry, and that makes you selfish. You take care of others, you have compassion on, and that is still being selfish. I don't know. Anyway, okay. But yeah, truthfully, it's more complicated, and there's a mixture of both, right? Okay. I'm going to skip forward here in my notes. But yeah, here's another little example. So, like, if you look at dolphins that save humans stuck in the ocean too, this is other animals as well. Dolphins find a sailor out in the ocean, and they support them to the top of the water so that they can continue breathing and not die, right? Well, why do the dolphins do this? Do the dolphins do it because they mistake the human for one of their dolphin friends? And they're thinking, oh, this is Joey, I'm just keeping him alive. No, they know it's a human, right? And do they think that the human is going to help them in some way? I don't think they're expecting the human to return the favor, to do something nice for them back. Do you think the dolphins believe that, well, if I help this human, then the dolphin god will pardon my sins, pardon my dolphin sins, and will let me go to dolphin heaven with all my deceased dolphin ancestors, and the dolphins are doing it for this future that they're promised? Do you think that's why the dolphins are being good, trying to help the human to survive? No, I think it's probably just that dolphins are compassionate by nature, because this is characteristic of mammals that have to take care of their young for long periods of time as they develop. They need to be compassionate, and it's pre-programmed into them to have that goodness and willing to sacrifice their own interest for another. Just as we also have pre-programmed desires that look out for our own interest as well. Okay. So hopefully now I've talked a bit about why it's important to not just be cynical or idealism, and you're understanding that. But yeah, the cynic is really afraid of getting their hopes up about something lest they come crashing down, because remember, in the past there was that traumatic, intense, overwhelming time, and your subconscious is now trying to protect you from feeling that ever again. That can apply to romantic interest in others, someone who can't bring themselves to date and try getting close to someone else because they're so afraid of getting hurt. And they might not admit it, but they're really afraid. Or of believing, having faith. If I try to look for, gather evidence that could possibly support believing in God, have experiences, like seek out if I'll have those experiences, what if I start to have my hopes up and then I'm disappointed? Or, and they're really afraid of that. And then they'll avoid taking action, just like the person, Elizabeth, who might avoid taking action of dating or pursuing guys who she thinks are attractive or have the attributes she would want in a husband, because she's super afraid now. Anyway. So oftentimes, sure, the cynic will reject things that really are that really are not true, and that protects them. But they will often say that their viewpoint is scientific, or and they would say others should be more scientific and rational. But they fail to acknowledge that, sure, they're very afraid of being stupid and being taken advantage of by believing things that aren't true, but they're not actually more scientific. A true scientist is willing to think of ways, situations that would prove the other alternative correct, and then they'll perform experiments to see if it proves that idea correct or not. They will say, well, if this idea were true, I would expect that if we did this, then X would result. And so in order to see if this idea is true, I'll do that. And then I'll see if X results, and I'll do that enough. And if I see some evidence, now they also use a p-value to see how strong the correlation is and how strong the evidence is. Maybe the evidence comes back that, well, we could say maybe there's like about a 50% chance. Well, maybe it's 75% chance it was correct, and 25% chance it's not correct. Now, in most scientific literature, they use a p-value of 0.05, which means that you have to prove it within 95%, above 95% certainty for it to be accepted, which means you might have to do a lot of testing. They use tremendous sample sizes to get a strong, more conclusive body of evidence. But the cynic might perform one or two tests and, oh, I'm off. I'm not going to do any more research. It didn't work for me. They might not admit that maybe their design methods were flawed, or that there was bias, or there's other reasons why they weren't getting the result they thought they were going to. And many times in scientific research, maybe the theory you had wasn't exactly accurate, and so you weren't getting the results for that theory, but that's because maybe you were applying the theory wrong, But the cynic will just call off and refuse to conduct any further research and just repeat to themselves in their mind reasons why not to believe, because they're so afraid of getting their hopes up again and then having them dashed. But yeah, and then in regards to faith, the cynic is really scared of getting their hopes up and believing. And one thing that they can do, and I have noticed, is that subconsciously, because they're unwilling to, if they're, to be more fair, it should be like a courtroom where both sides argue. In your mind, you should be thinking of the case for each side. But the cynic is so afraid of really applying their full mental effort and their full intelligence, to advocate for believing. Only the prosecuting attorney trying to come up with reasons not to believe is given the full force of their intellect. They hold back on the defense. And because subconsciously they know they're doing this, they like to choose someone else who can argue and defend the other side. That way they don't have to risk putting themselves out there, coming up with reasons to believe. They'll choose someone else who they trust to argue that side for them. And then they'll argue the side against it. And they'll argue why not to believe. And the other person will argue why they should believe. That way they never have to put themselves out there getting their hopes up. I said that a lot of times. They don't want to get their hopes up, right? But yeah, and they hope that the other person will defeat all their arguments, and they'll have to surrender and know that it's true without any possible doubt. Because remember, they're so scared of this traumatic feeling of being overwhelmed with the doubt and despair that they irrationally do not want to risk possibly going back to that. And so they want to be proven without any possible doubt before they'll start to move forward, lest they be caught in that feeling they were stupid or taken advantage of, or that despair. And if the other person could just eradicate all possible reasons to doubt so that they can't even come up with any more questions, then they would finally feel safe. It's like someone who has a phobia of spiders. It's irrational. They're just so scared of it that they won't go into a room. What if there's a spider in there, But these people, they won't go forward. What if there's something that could make me doubt that it's all true, and then I'll be so scared that I'm being taken advantage of, and on and on and on. And also, to protect themselves, the subconscious mind will often diminish their memories of evidences to believe because they're so scary, Just like the idealist will diminish and forget or not notice reasons to doubt another person, or their mind just skips over it and doesn't really put emphasis on that information. The cynic will skip over and not realize information why they should trust or believe, because they're so scared of doing that. They've been hurt in the past by trusting, and so they just have this subconscious aversion to doing it. And also they have the intense fear of being stupid. They'd hate to look stupid. They'd hate to feel stupid. They'd rather come off as mean or confrontational than come off to other people as being stupid or having been wrong. And they're very subconscious about their intellect and their ability to think critically and logically, because in the past they felt so ashamed of their lack of doing that when they were more idealistic. And so yeah, they'll defend their intelligence tooth and nail, but they often employ that reaction formation that I talked about, strengthening the opposite attitude in yourself to avoid doing something. They'll look at other people, hate people who are stupid, who believe things that aren't true, they'll focus on that so much in their mind, and it's a way of defending themselves from ever doing that, because they are so afraid of believing and trusting and being hurt. But really, they do have a repressed fear that what if they really aren't so genius themselves? They fear, what if I really am not so genius? So hopefully, I know this video went on a long time, but hopefully listening to it, if anyone who was struggling with more cynicism listened to it, this would help bring to your awareness, just by listening to these things and talking about them, it'll bring to your awareness the things that are happening inside your head, often more on a subconscious level. And hopefully you can move on in those levels of emotional maturity from being, there was idealism, and then there's cynicism, but then there's having your eyes open and acknowledging that it's not all black and white. And that, right, people aren't just good or selfish, but there's both. And once you're able to get past those irrational fears, connect with that irrational fear, the intense fear of trusting and believing. And once you recognize that fear, it can help you move beyond that fear to be able to honestly and openly approach faith and experiences with God. And so, yeah, I leave that with you to move forward and apply. And I can explain, I understand these things to an extent because I've had plenty of cynicism, idealism, cynicism, and then a more balanced perspective. That's very common, that a lot of people experience that. Some personalities are more prone to stay in idealism, some more to cynicism, but the people who move beyond that are able to they're the most effective and the most wise. But yeah, good luck.